Hello, this is Lee Bannister, the narrator and one of the co-producers of the ATV Land DVD documentaries. Welcome to the second part of a special presentation of a promotional talk I was asked to give to a group of visitors to Tipton Library in September 2013. Our first DVD from ATV Land in Colour had been released in 2011, followed by From Headlines to Tightlines, the Story of ATV Today in 2012. In the first part of the talk, we looked at the early days of the Midlands News Magazine Programme ATV Today. And now in part two, we'll look at some of the hard-hitting news stories that were covered, as well as some of the presenters who became personalities.
Okay, so can we give another warm welcome to Lee for a second?
Thank you very much. Right, we'll go back to the 1970s again now. We had some of the lighter stories before the break, and we go onto a couple more serious stories now. You obviously will remember that the 70s terrorism was rife, across the whole of the UK. And as I said earlier on, if you know Birmingham, then you'll know that the end of Broad Street is where the ATV studios were. Then you go down through New Street, and right at the other end of New Street, obviously about 3/4 of a mile away, is the Rotunda, and that was one of the biggest news stories, the pub bombings. So we've got a little bit of that.
In 1974, Birmingham was rocked by 2 IRA bombs planted in the city centre.
The night of the pub bombings, I was having a drink in the bar, which is my usual place after the programme.
It was sort of early evening, late afternoon, early evening, and a lot of us were in the bar, and we heard the bomb.
It wasn't the first time that bombs had gone off in Birmingham, or that there had been 1 or 2 incidents involving IRA bombs, small ones which had gone off in doorways here and there. This sounded way bigger, and we thought, bomb. And then followed by another one, of course, very shortly afterwards.
Bob's brother, Mike Warman, worked with me on the news desk, and we were phoning everybody we could think of, and get them out and get a camera crew. Because in those days we didn't have crews hanging around at night time unless there was a specific reason.
We got a crew together, got down into the centre of town very quickly. In fact, I think we're probably the first crew on the scene, and it was mayhem.
I didn't go down. We were only the crews that were to be there to report on what was happening went down.
One of my overriding memories that night was not only just the filming itself, and all the chaos that was going down in New Street and at the Rotunda where the other bomb had gone off, but actually trying to ship material back, because the police put up a cordon very quickly, and in fact we thought that there were many more bombs about to go off. And I'll never forget trying to get some film back to the studio very quickly, running back through the bullring, taking a shortcut, and actually tripping over one of the army robots that was going in to look at a package. A rather suspicious package. But the other overriding memory was taking the gaffer from the tavern in the town pub and getting him up New Street, walking him back up, because you couldn't use a car or anything like that, walking him back up to the studios for a live interview with ITN that night. We went live to air with very little information. I mean, nobody really knew the extent of the damage, how many people were killed or injured. And it was tricky. Actually, I seem to remember that we got it about right as far as the numbers were concerned, but a nerve-wracking night.
As the evening wore on, we suddenly began to realise how awful what had happened. And then the next morning, when we could walk down New Street and all of the glass was out of the shop windows, and there was this kind of eerie silence and no traffic in New Street, and it was absolutely shaking.
Mike and I walked around the city afterwards, and it was a weird feeling. And of course, for days afterwards, people were frightened to come into Birmingham.
Remember that well. It turned out in the end 21 people I think were died, and there were many more injured. There were 2 pubs which I didn't realise. One of them was at the foot of the Rotunda, and the other one was just up from the Odeon Cinema. I think it's more or less where the Works bookshop is now. There were 2. Yeah.
That was on the ground.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah.
Down the steps.
Yeah. Yeah, right. That was 1974. It obviously all culminated with the so-called Birmingham 6 being acquitted in the early 1990s, and I don't think they've actually worked out exactly who did it after that. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But 4 years later, than after the pub bombings in 1978, you probably remember a farmhouse just outside Kings Winford. Yeah, it became the focus. It was the 19th of September 1978, and we've got a clip of that night's programme. In the September of 1978, the murder of 13-year-old paperboy Carl Bridgewater was the main news.
Good evening. As you may well have seen on ITN, a big police search has been launched in Staffordshire for the killers of a 13-year-old newspaper boy. Carl Bridgewater was shot in the head at point-blank range with a shotgun after he disturbed burglars during his round. A local newspaper has today offered a reward to try and find the killers. More than 200 police and detectives were brought into the search at Yew Tree Farm near Kings Winford. The shooting happened late yesterday afternoon as Carl, who lived at nearby Wordsley, was finishing his paper round. It's a select area where many wealthy businessmen live, and police believe that at least 2 or 3 men had broken into the house. They apparently invited Carl in and then shot him through the head. Tony Maycock spoke to the man leading the investigation, Detective Chief Superintendent Robert Stewart.
Mr. Stewart, what happened at this lonely farmhouse yesterday?
Well, a certain amount of it can only be conjecture, but I know that Carl was on his paper round. We have a sighting of him at 4 o'clock, on his paper round as normal, and certainly he called at this farm sometime after 4 o'clock to deliver the evening paper. And there, shot in the head at point-blank range, quite cold-bloodedly, and I can honestly think of no motive other than that he disturbed intruders. Forcible entry had been made to the house, of course.
You've started quite a large-scale operation in the area. Do you have any leads to go on yet?
Yes, we have a sighting of a blue car in the driveway to the farmhouse at about 4:30 p.m, and that's a critical time, of course. A sketchy description at the moment, but it's a blue car, possibly an estate. And I would like any information at all from any member of the public, any information they think might assist us. I would like them to come forward and let the team and myself decide whether it's of use or not.
What about Carl's parents? How have they reacted?
Well, they're naturally distressed, extremely distressed. In fact, they're shattered and under heavy sedation.
The killing of the newspaper boy Carl Bridgewater caught everybody's imagination. It was the worst possible thing to happen to a young lad. Quite innocently, he disturbed burglars. One of them pulled out a shotgun and just blasted him into the next world. We reenacted, as far as we could, that crime for Police 5. And I remember going into the house and into the room where he was killed. And no doubt about it, I felt a chill. I often pass that house. It's not far away from where I live, and I can never look at that house without sort of thinking, yeah, something terrible, really terrible happened there that day. And the name Carl Bridgewater, we're talking about many, many years later, is still one that sends a shock through people in that locality.
The DVD series obviously covers some of the biggest stories of that period, including, as they mentioned earlier on, so the big industrial disputes such as the problems at British Leyland. But there's also the lighter side that we've seen some of the clips for. There were a great many famous faces. For example, from the world of comedy, we've got people such as Spike Milligan sharing a bag of nuts with Reg Harcourt, if you can imagine that. Morecambe and Wise and John Swallow, if you can imagine the three of them together. There's film stars, sportsmen, so on. And sport obviously was as big as ever throughout the 70s. We chatted with Gary Newbon about Brian Clough, who we got to know well over the years. They had a grudging appreciation of each other, I think. Especially around the time of Brian's move from Derby to Leeds and eventually, back to Nottingham. Then we spoke to Nick Owen, who told us that on his very first day at work on ATV Today, one of the stories he had to cover was the signing of Trevor Francis to Nottingham Forest, about 1979, who became the world's first £1 million player. Pales into insignificance with the news this week, doesn't it, really? Yeah. But maybe two of the most associated faces with ATV in the 70s were Bob Warman, who's obviously still there, and a chap called Derek Hobson. Remember him?
Throughout the 1970s, ATV Today was the most popular news magazine programme in the Midlands, with a regular audience of over 3 million viewers. It continued to bring news and features to its audience throughout the late 1970s. By 1978, there were some changes in the presenting team. Bob Warman returned from a stint at Yorkshire Television to take over as anchorman when Derek Hobson bowed out later that year.
I went up to Yorkshire for 2 or 3 years and had a thoroughly good time. Wonderful company to work for. Working up at Yorkshire gave me the opportunity, I think, because Austin Mitchell was then the main linkman there, and he went off to become MP for Grimsby. Richard Whiteley, he of Countdown fame that was to be, he stepped up into Austin's position, and they looked around for somebody who'd done a bit of presenting. Ah, Bob, you're the man. You can step in as number 2. So I got that sort of, that necessary experience in the studio. So anyway, when the position came up, when Derek moved on, I thought, I'm going to go for that because the Midlands is my patch. So that's how I came to come back, and never regretted it. It is my manor.
Before he left, Derek Hobson was acknowledged for his somewhat unusual fashion sense, winning an award for his choice in ties.
This was the little prezi they gave us. Isn't that rather nice, actually?
Was your initials stamped in gold?
Little present that 10 of us got, little initials there. You open this little box up and... Oh, this is rather touching. It looks like a coffin. I don't know whether there was some reason behind this. And inside, 3 silk ties.
They look pretty.
You may see this little number.
An old paisley and a stripe
blue
Arthur
one
English
there.
type, and they're huge kipper ties, aren't they?
Well, I gather this is still in, actually, John. I don't know. I mean...
I'm not being personal, Derek. I mean, people can be extremely personal about your ties, but they're not very gentlemanly, are they?
I don't know. I mean, it's a bit of fun.
I mean, 1 or 2 gentlemen...
Now, you don't want me to come on with a drab old tie like that awful thing you've got round your neck, John.
This is an ATV company tie, Derek. They do happen to employ you, and I'm very proud to be wearing it.
But not meant to be knotted that way, John, surely.
This is the way I was taught, Derek.
Was it? Yeah.
Amongst the gentlemen that received awards, as you did, accolades, yesterday, I suppose there were 1 or 2 gentlemen.
Oh, there were 1 or 2, John. This is extraordinary. There was Reginald Maudling, and there was David Steele, and Sir Charles Forty.
Did they notice the size of your knot?
Actually, Mrs. Healy did notice it. She came over and said you've got a very big knot.
You certainly have. Haven't you always?
He wore these amazing ties with a massive knot, which looked more like a cravat than a knot. And horrible, great sort of big squares on these ties. But people noticed him, and they used to write in and ask him for one of his ties, or he used to put his ties up for the odd prize and so on. Yeah, Derek's ties, God.
Yeah, I remember Derek's ties, but I always remember that Derek Hobson was one of my favourites when I was really little. Mum and Dad will probably tell you about that as well. We weren't able to get hold of him in time for the documentary. I think he's still around, but we just couldn't get hold of him. We move back to some of the more light-hearted stories now. John Swallow again continued to be a regular member of the team, both in front of and behind the camera for many years, as well as being, kind of the funny guy reporter. He was also producer of a number of programmes, including, I think, Jaywalking to begin with. But from 1972, he was joined by a chap called Chris Tarrant.
I was very long-haired, and I think I just looked very different from everybody else. And I genuinely really did not know what I was doing. They did all the obligatory obvious things. They sent me out interviewing any sort of politician I hated, any sort of shop steward I hated. And I think I wasn't very good at pretending that I liked them because I didn't, basically. And it wasn't a great start, I think, for about a month. I mean, they were employing me week to week to week to week. And I thought, this is not really working out. I'm not really enjoying this. They're not really getting much out of me. And it's all going to go wrong in any Friday now. And then, for whatever reason, they sent me out to do the sort of lighter items, which I absolutely loved. And every day, they would either find me a nutter and bring one in the studio, and there are a lot of them in the Midlands, or I'd go out and film my own. I did this interview one day with this bloke walking from Evesham to Worcester, a distance of 13 miles with 4 ferrets down his trousers. He got these ferrets out of the box, and I mean, they were really nasty, vicious, like this. And he had no real protection. I was expecting sort of stainless steel stuff. I mean, he had just an extra pair of pants on. And he stuck these 4 ferrets down there. And they were, one of them bit him as he got it out of the box. I mean, he actually drew blood because they really dig deep. And I go, why exactly are you doing this? Well, you know, it's for charity. I'm thinking, well, yeah, it's lovely, but there must be something else. Could you just cycle or something?
You've got 4 ferrets down there?
Yes, true.
What does it feel like? Aren't you...
Well, uncomfortable.
Aren't you being bitten?
Not yet, no.
You've done quite a lot of this. I mean, have you ever been bitten?
Yes,
I mean, that one there tried to take a chunk out of your finger before you even got it near your trouser leg.
Yeah, well, that's doing it fair, like, for the old people, you know, just for a gimmick, like, too.
But what on earth possessed you to suddenly take up putting ferrets down your trousers?
Well, to try and raise money for the old people's Christmas dinner.
But there must be easier ways of raising money, Nicky.
Well, I don't know. I don't think people realise how many lonely people there is and how many people there needs Christmas dinners, you know, and I don't think they...
But why ferrets down your trousers? I mean, have you had any association with ferrets yourself before?
Well, I've read them since I was since I went to school. Well, that's nasty.
Was that one biting?
Yeah.
But they've got the sort of teeth that hang on, haven't they?
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Is he still hanging on?
Not quite now.
Well, you've got 13 miles to do on Sunday.
Yeah.
And you reckon you're going to do that?
No, but I'm going to try anyway.
And this morning you stuck 4 down. Probably on Sunday you'll only use 2. I think if you've got any sense.
Well, I've got a lot of sense. I mean, everybody makes a fool of themselves one time or other in their life, but I mean, I'm doing it for a good cause, you know.
I think you're a very brave fool. Come on, let's have a little walk and see how we get on.
Yeah.
We did a couple of miles, and he was doing this sort of, you know, with his legs quite wide, as you would. And he had his wife walking along beside me, basically, on the pavement, sort of looking after her best interests. And all of a sudden, one of them bit him, like this. And then, of course, once he nipped blood, I mean, it's a fest, isn't it? They're all down his trousers, digging in. And this bloke, I mean, just started screaming. And I thought, well, and I said to him, look, you know, you've only done 2 miles, mate. It's another 11 miles. He went, no way, I'll keep going. And he did, he went all the way. An amazing man. I mean, his testicles were ripped to shreds. You just think, it's very, very, you know, creditable, but couldn't you have done something else for charities? Something that didn't involve your testicles getting bitten to shreds. It's an amazing bit of film.
Come on then, why don't you take them out and have a breather?
Well, you know, it's just it. I mean, if you take them out and they see the daylight again, they get more ferocious.
How much more ferocious they are at the moment, are they?
No, quite uncomfortable, but never mind.
This is only a training stint, Nick. How long are you going to keep this up?
Oh, that's it, isn't it?
Well, you don't want to draw blood in training. Have you been badly bitten on the training sessions?
Well, just once.
Don't you think you ought to stop and take them out?
Yeah, I reckon I better.
Because you're worrying me to death with those
Yes,
things.
I reckon I better.
They seem to have had enough anyway.
And at one point, one of the ferrets actually comes out from his fly hole, and that's the bit the girls always really like on that film. I don't know why. They always find that very, very funny and exciting.
Well, you've done 5 minutes already today in training. You've got to do 13 miles on Sunday. I think you must be out of your mind, but I wish you the very best of luck.
Well, it's for the old people, so if I don't make it, you know, I can always take them out, can't I?
Yeah, rather him than me. There were times when Chris Tarrant and John Swallow got together to do a film. We've got one of those for you as well. Riding a tandem.
John Swallow was my first ever boss. I think he had some label called features editor, whatever that meant. It meant basically just had expenses. We used to go to the pub a lot. He was the most energetic, clever little guy. Very, very clever. Amazing imagination. He should have been a sort of huge, you know, national TV star. I mean, he was as good as an awful lot of people since who've done, you know, sort of vox pop type television and probably even someone like Beadle, bless him. He was just an amazingly funny man.
He just had such a sense of humour, a dry sense of humour. You could have a wonderful conversation, complete Mickey take conversation, total banter with him. But the pieces he created, the films he made, marvellous, real masterpieces.
On screen he was total deadpan, but off screen he was a cheerful, jolly bloke. And he liked to drink. Not too much, but he did like a drink.
He and I did a lot of stuff together. We did this ridiculous day on a tandem, John and I, which was like a sort of, you know, Keystone Cops thing, which was just very funny. And most of the ideas came from Swole.
I'll always have a memory in my head of those two cycling together on a tandem with knotted handkerchiefs on their head. I mean, they were so funny.
And there we go. Ended up back at the studios. Now, Chris stayed on the ATV Today team on and off for a number of years, and sometimes he said he could even be found reading the news bulletins, but we haven't been able to find any evidence of that at all. But by the start of 1974, he got something else taking up his time. He was on Saturday mornings. He joined with a singer and a performer called John Asher, and he started an 8-year stint of being silly on something called Tiz Was. Anybody remember that? Yeah, I do. Now, we interviewed Chris on a couple of occasions. The first time was at the Millionaire Studios in Elstree, the old film studios there. And then we went to a bank in Piccadilly Circus for some reason. On both occasions, we just set him going and we couldn't shut him up, as you might expect. Now, in those days, your local ITV company didn't just report the news. They really did their best to become part of the community in days before, say, local radio got going in this area. And they often tried to give local people help. And this is kind of the way that they did it. The weekly postbag section of the programme, Letterbox, was a lively feature, presented by Helen Piddock.
Helen Piddock, bless her, great big tall girl. She's taller than me. She was ever so nice, but sort of very strange, because she seemed very straight-laced, actually. And to the viewers, she seemed very straight-laced, but she was actually potty.
This must be one of the country's most well-known hotel receptions. 3,000 episodes have centred around this Crossroads motel. Over 15,000 actors have been involved, wading through 52 tonnes of script paper and learning nearly 1.5 million words. So, to celebrate all this hard work, last night the cast had a bit of a knees-up at a Worcestershire hotel.
Mrs Jones of Cove and Wolverhampton is challenging Val Lewis, our reporter from the Citizens' Rights Programme, on the cost per week of keeping a pony. Val mentioned the figure of £9.17, but Mrs Jones says it's more like £3.50 a week. Well, Val, what do you say to that?
Well, I've double-checked that figure, and it's definitely right for keeping a pony this coming winter, which is a very different position from last winter. And I meant to discourage irresponsible buying, such as for Christmas presents.
Val Lewis was, I suppose, our consumer reporter, looking at viewers' grumbles and so on and so forth, viewers' problems. She looked like everybody's aunt, really.
Val Lewis, blimey, I haven't thought about her for years. She was extraordinary. She just said the first thing that came into her head, however daft it was. But she was terribly likeable. But she did this thing called, I think it was called That's My Goat. And it was like, good evening. Welcome to, here's Val with That's My Goat. But I've no idea what it was about, because we were laughing so much at the time. I think the caption came up with a goat on. And then, I don't know, I suppose it was, what gets your goat or whatever, but it was, That's My Goat.
I'm honestly not sure how she arrived in television, but she looked as though she'd just walked out of the Bullring Market and straight into the television studios. That was her. That was the key. She was everybody's, and I don't mean to be rude, but she was everybody's sort of ordinary lady that you could relate to. She was just like the viewers who wrote into her. And people used to write in with the most extraordinary problems and expect an answer from Val Lewis, which they got, by the way. I mean, she was no slouch.
Do you know we actually had to edit down Chris's and especially Bob's laughter when we showed him a picture of Val Lewis, because he hadn't seen her for years. Obviously the memories were still there. And for ages afterwards we couldn't stop Chris going, That's my goat. It just kept on going through his mind, We're nearly at the end, because by the time the 1980s came along, ITV was completely changing out of all recognition. In the south of England, some of the old ITV companies closed and some new ITV companies began. Breakfast television was on the horizon with TVAM, technology was improving, and the broadcasting regulator, then called the IBA, wanted ATV to concentrate equally on the East Midlands, just as much as the West Midlands, but there were certain conditions imposed on them. In January 1980, the IBA invited tenders for the new franchise period, commencing in January 1982. Concerns were raised that ATV hadn't focused enough on its Midlands region, preferring to make the programmes at its Elstree site outside London. For the new franchise period, the IBA introduced a new set of contractual obligations for the Midlands broadcaster. The franchise was to become a dual region,
and was to have studios based in both the East and West Midlands. ATV submitted its application in May 1980 under the new name of ATV Midlands Limited. On December the 29th, 1980, ATV received confirmation from the IBA that, subject to certain conditions, they were prepared to offer ATV Midlands the broadcasting licence for the East and West Midlands starting on January the 1st, 1982. The company was to be wholly based in the Midlands and adopt a new name that better reflected its Midlands nature.
For me, the end of ATV was a very sad day. I mean, that logo we see there, I still regard as the most important, impressive, impactive television logo. The old double I, it starts off as one, then splits into that double I there, ATV, with a very simple sound to it. It goes dun 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 da da. I love that sound. It was a great company. It was a terrific company to work for. It gave me a lot of opportunities, and the actual end of it was swift.
ATV's final few minutes on air were actually between midnight and 12:34 AM on the 1st of January 1982. The station was closed down with little ceremony. There was one difference. Mike Prince was joined in the announcer studio by Shaw Taylor for a final goodbye and a brief mention of things to come. There was no goodbye from ATV, just welcome to Central and a final look at the clock.
And that was it. That was the end of ATV. The next morning, the big globe appeared, something in the sky split open and it became Central and was all completely different. They repainted the building, rainbow colours on all the railings around the outside, and all that was swept away. And so ATV Today became Central News. But ATV Today is that's where our story comes to an end. Maybe one day we'll carry on to do Central News, you never know. But just to finish it off, anybody done any welly wangling? This is how it works.
There are few things that make an Englishman's pulse race quite as fast as a good weekend's welly wanging. Last autumn, the good people of Powick in Worcestershire played host to some of England's greatest ever wangers. And at a secret training camp, we filmed as a number of the hot favourites were putting the seal on their performance ready for the big one. The rules of welly wanging are simple but stringent. Only a number 9 Wellington must be used, a size 5 of course for the ladies, and it must be thrown underarm with the boot end first. At the moment of delivery, the contestant must cry out clearly the traditional blood-curdling cry of 5 up your kilt. Failure to do this deems the welly not to have been fairly wanged. Throws over 15,000 feet are equally inadmissible, and the organisers accept no responsibility whatever for any interference with rare bird life or low-flying aircraft.
I never really understood welly wanging, but apparently I invented it. And I think I was somewhere, and they said, well, we need an item. And I went, well, you know, there's nothing much going on, we might as well chuck it. I think it had been raining over here wellies on, so let's just chuck wellies as far as we can. And people just, it's pathetic, it just didn't, through Wellingtons as far, there was no skill involved. You know, you didn't have to be Sonia Lanneman or Fatima Whitbread, you just picked up a Wellington and threw it as far as you could. And some people did funny sort of run-ups and all this stuff, but in the end you were just chucking a Wellington. Oh, people were disqualified for putting sand and things in it as well. Because what they didn't realise is, as it goes up in the air, all the sand falls out, which is a bit of a giveaway that you're cheating. Yeah, it became a really big thing for a few years. I mean, it's probably never going to become an Olympic event, and I think I invented it one very wet afternoon in somewhere like Ashby de la Zouche.
There we go, that's what welly wanging's all about. Just left for me to say, if anybody's interested in the DVD, if you haven't already got them, there's some postcards here. And I'll just add on that we were nominated earlier on this year in the category of the Federation of Commercial Audiovisual Libraries. We were nominated up against two other documentary DVDs for best use of footage in a home entertainment release, and we won. We actually went to, a group of them went to the, I think, one of the big hotels on Park Lane in London, presented with a nice big glass statue, so it makes it all worthwhile. And there we go. I've got a clip actually of the first one that we did. It's only about 10 minutes. If anybody's interested in having a look, it's not part of this, but if you want to see about the studios, I'll put that on as well, if that's all right.
These were all really good, high-rating programmes produced regionally.
They had a gardening programme and a fishing programme, and then somehow they brought it all in together to be ATV Today.
There was certainly the impression in Birmingham that we were very much second best, and that Elstree had everything.
It was rat infested.
It really was.
Because it had been a ballroom and a cinema, the West End, and of course it was by the canals. So once they started knocking the building down,
all the
rats had nowhere to go.
Anything could go wrong, and if anything went wrong, it was the announcer who got the job of putting it right again.
When the audiences came in, they used to love watching them come in, because they walked down that long corridor to the studio, I can't remember the number, 1 or 2, and they turn left into the studio, and they're looking at pictures of Adam Chance and Jane and Noel and Benny, all and the stars that they'd made as well, Boone. They were all there, and they used to come in and look at, and then suddenly see Jane Rossington walking out of the dressing room. Oh, I mean.
Slowly we got the sets really tuned in to how we could work. Our sets were, as I say, like theatre sets, so they were flats, so they did shake. If you leaned against them or something, or somebody knocked them, they went blah, 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 just like a theatre set.
And she turned up at the cathedral, dolled up to the nines with all the furs and the jewellery and everything else, and she was told to don't sit in the front, don't sit on the side, go up to the back of there. She got very upset about it, actually. But the storyline was she was broke at the time, and suddenly she appeared all dolled to the nines, silly old bugger. Nice lady, though. Great fun.
And I do remember he'd come round once a year. We'd all be prepared for this because he'd come and see the show and everything. He'd arrive on the studio floor, quite a tiny guy really, but with a cigar, even though it said no smoking in the studio, he had his cigar, and he'd wave at everybody, say, "You're all doing a wonderful job." It was a bit like Grace Brothers, you know. And then out would come the champagne. There was a real sense of showbiz.
We were not allowed to do anything that wasn't our designated job, which was to go into that studio, sit there, see what we've got to say, and walk out again. We weren't allowed to switch on lights. We weren't even allowed to move anything. And so they had to have an electrician who sat in the studio simply to put one light switch.
The people that run television were still in bed. They didn't have a clue what was going on the Saturday morning. They assumed they had a children's show that lots of people loved because it got massive ratings, so they didn't bother at all. I'm sure they never watched it. But if they'd watched it, they'd have gone, "Oh my goodness, what's going on here?"
And we blagged Trevor McDonald into coming on Tiswas and surprising Lenny Henry, because Lenny used to do this character called "I'm Trevor McDonald." And we thought, wouldn't it be a jolly whiz if we could get the real Trevor McDonald? And I put him up in the Holiday Inn next door, and I just remember him smuggling in with a blanket over his head so that nobody would see him. And this wonderful voice, even then, coming out from under the blanket going, "Do you know, Chris, this really is most undignified." And I just remember as we snuck in through the door.
I said to this bloke, "What do you do for a living?" He said, "I've been unemployed 2 years." I said, "Smashing." And if looks could have killed, I mean, I was horrendous.
I was supposed to be dressed like Adrian Headley in sort of baggy overalls, but we sort of changed that, and somehow I ended up in a skin-tight silver suit with these boots which came from a sex shop in London, and they were on about 6.5-inch heels. I never really thought this was very appropriate for children.
Spike Milligan walks across camera, turns back, and puts a custard pie in my face. How many of you out there can say, "You were flammed by Spike Milligan"? I can.
Jonathan Ross asked me a while back, he said, "Do you think OTT was ahead of its time, or do you think it was crap?" And I said, "I think it was crap ahead of its time." I mean, it kind of was. It was just, I mean, nowadays, nobody would turn a hair at OTT at all.
We're working in large premises, 3 large sound studios, which were going absolutely non-stop. All the big shows were there, Crossroads, all the big game shows were being produced there, and there were over 1,000 people working on this site, and it was very, very exciting.
There was a real sense of showbiz. And also, when I was doing the shows and in makeup with Annie, on a Thursday or all through the week, we'd have Crossroads people in. There'd be Noel Gordon sitting there. She only had 1 chair and 1 makeup artist. And then there'd be all the other lovely people off the cast as well. Jane Rossington, Ronnie, Sue Lloyd, the whole lot.
And then later on, of course, when you were getting golden shot there, you go into makeup, you'd be sitting next to various celebrities. And so the place was buzzing.
I tried it out, and it clicked. And in fact, if I didn't do it, people would come and said, why didn't you say keep and build? I mean, they almost got addicted to the old keep and build.
And he said, we're going to need some wigs. Have you got some wigs? And they went, wigs? He said, well, you must have some wigs. You're a makeup department. He said, well, yes, I think we have. And they were literally throwing cupboard doors open and hunting around. Because they used to do everything to order. If you said we want so-and-so in a wig, they would get a wig.
When we were told we were doing Spreading Image, we went down to meet the puppeteers and everything else. And there they are, camping around in front of a camera, no bigger than that, doing that and that. And I'm saying, this is a waste of bloody time. This is not doing anything for anybody. I'm sorry, you must hang on until we get a set and know where you are and what you're behind and how we're masking it. They were just being silly, I'm sorry. To remember all that was with...
They had spent 3 weeks rehearsing
just doing
one
bugger all
sketch.
nothing. And it was ludicrous.
We used to write Tiswas in the ATV bar and a club called the Gary Owen down the road. And those were our sort of main creative areas, you know. The bar, God, the thousands of hours of my life I spent crawling on all fours around that bar going, here's the script for tomorrow, everybody. With Frank Carson in my head. Hey, the cracker, can't wait to tell that one. That's going to be marvellous, that. Upside down, marvellous.
So we've got this guy who's like this, and the security man's out. Get your head out of shot, get under the table. Now shove your hand up his jacket and straighten his head. So we've got this security man under the desk, straightening this poor sod's head. Now he said, I'll never forget, I took it, just let me get this one shot, then you can go. If in fact you can walk. He said, just try and give us a smile. And then I can use the smile on the edit.
Chris Tarrant, of course, you wouldn't believe it, he was hired to be a journalist, a reporter, but very quickly the editor of the time decided that Chris wasn't really the man to sit there and read the news, so they would send him out on anything and everything that was going to be offbeat, I suppose.
I joined from what was then BBC Radio Birmingham, and I heard there was a job going, and I literally knocked on the editor's door and said, I'm your man. And in those days it was as easy as that, well, sort of easy.
Really, so many things started to happen. There's this, is there an underground feeling that they're trying to get rid of the show? There was always that. And when, I don't know what Nolly did, whether she upset people, but she suddenly was sacked.
Mike was very much, when I met Mike, he was exactly as he was on air, of course, you know, very dapper, very, very smooth, suave, sophisticated, very polite. Mike was always very kind to me. He'd obviously seen announcers come and go. He lasted the whole, the whole length of the time from ATV onwards.
I joined at the same time as Hilary Holden, and get this, we both started on a 4-weekly contract, so we knew we got 4 weeks' work, and that was it. And we had no further guarantee. And in fact, at the time, they said, whichever of you is best at the end of it gets the job, the other one gets duffed. Are you allowed to do that now? I don't think so.
And we had a window through to the gallery where the director sat next door, so we could see them, and 2 cameras at the most. Most of the time it was just one. And where the camera was, it was literally, the desk was here and we sat behind, and there were like all the bits and bobs on the wall there. It was really small. Not as small as the broom cupboard, but very small.
All the things that used to happen in this small space, actually. I mean, they used to be swarming with kids and boxing kangaroos and elephants weeing in the corner and custard pies and buckets. And, the news the rest of the week.
It was a great company. It was a terrific company to work for. It gave me a lot of opportunities. The actual end of it was swift.
And then it settled down to Central, but very quickly became obvious this was a business, a big business, not a television business, as opposed to the razzmatazz that ATV brought and the Grade family brought to the proceedings.
There you go, that's what it's all about. If you're interested in that DVD, that's the first one we did, and the cards are there on the table. That's it.
Have you all enjoyed that? Yes. And Acorns is our chosen charity, and Willy Wanging and Ferrets Down the Trousers, so I might pass that on to our charity champion this year.
You never know.
And I forgot to say earlier on that Lee's actually formerly from Tipton as well, so it's always nice to welcome a Tiptownian back into the town.
I went to Foxshards Primary School. Love it.
And again, can we just say a big thank you to Lee for coming.